Hello, I'm Dave Feinlieb, and this is Beyond the Shelf. This show is an open exploration of the people and process behind e-commerce. Through conversations with innovators in the space, we learn the stories of these leaders and their strategies for e-commerce success. You can find out more about how we're helping leading brands and retailers build images, videos, product copy, and sell sheets at scale at itsrapid.ai. My guests on today's show are Lauren Livak Gilbert from the Digital Shelf Institute and Mike Black from Profitero. Lauren is the director of the Digital Shelf Institute, also known as the DSI. Before that, she was manager of Digital Shelf North American Consumer at Johnson & Johnson. At J&J, Lauren was responsible for the overall North America Digital Shelf strategy for 42 plus retailers, including Amazon, Walmart, Target, Walgreens, CVS, and many more, and 33 plus brands across the US, Canada, and all acquired companies to support the company's e-commerce goals. Mike is the Chief Marketing Officer of Profitero, which provides commerce solutions for profitable growth. Profitero is well known for their e-commerce analytics capabilities. Prior to his CMO role, Mike was Senior Vice President of Marketing and Vice President of Marketing. And before Profitero, Mike was Vice President of Product Marketing at Nielsen, Director of Marketing at Affinova, and Senior Manager of Marketing Programs at Staples Advantage. We discussed Lauren and Mike's perspectives on the state of the digital shelf, their latest research report, and the interest brands have in embracing AI, as well as the complexity of making AI a reality in production environments. Please enjoy my conversation with Lauren Livak Gilbert and Mike Black. Lauren and Mike, welcome to the show.
Great to be
Thanks
here.
for having us.
Amazing to have you both here. Lauren, I'd love to start off with you. Would you take us back? How'd you get interested in this space?
Oh, gosh, I love this question because it's a kind of interesting story. So I got thrown into e-commerce, actually. When I was at J&J, I was in a project management role, and we were kind of reorganizing to have more of a central team. And my leader at the time, who was amazing and believed in me, was like, hey, we have this digital shelf thing. Do you want to take it over? And I was like, okay, the digital shelf, e-commerce, I know what it is. Yeah, that sounds great. And the first day on the job, I got a presentation from a brand that was very angry that the digital shelf was broken. And there were actually sad face emojis and fire emojis on the slides. And I said, okay, what did I get myself into? So that is actually how I started in e-commerce. It was an amazing journey once we got past that. But that was my first week or two on the job. And I kind of learned trial by fire, like most people who start in e-commerce. But it was an awesome ride, and I'm really glad I landed in it.
So into the deep end right away.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I had meeting after meeting with brand, and there was a lot of education gaps about what was happening in the space, what was happening internally. And this was also pre-COVID, right? So remember, e-commerce wasn't as important or didn't have as much visibility prior to COVID. So there was a lot of conversations, a lot of education, but it helped me understand every single corner of e-commerce. So I'm very, very grateful for that experience.
Mike, tell us about you. What's the backstory? How'd you get your start in the space?
So the way I got started is, so I was working at Nielsen, which, as you guys know, is a measurement analytics company with a long history of looking at retail, brick and mortar retail. And we were working on a project I worked in product marketing. We were working on a project that was basically a tool that would test PDPs. So it was almost like a concept test for a new product. But what you could do is you could test how different prices might resonate with clients. And I remember looking at this product, and it, was like a PDP the way you see it. I'm like, this is weird. Like, what is this? This idea of like a PDP. And somehow along that way, I learned about Profitero. And at the time at Nielsen, I was really looking to do something different. The more I read about Profitero, the more I was interested. And yeah, that was really my exposure to e-commerce. It wasn't until I started to learn about Profitero and the opportunity and the technology they had there that it kind of blew my mind and opened my mind to this whole funky world of PDPs and digital shelves and all that vocabulary. And from there, I was hooked. And I've never looked back. I've always been hungry to learn about this space and translate what I'm learning back to the industry.
Mike, I got to ask, you have this incredible ability to post insights on LinkedIn and to do it with such consistency. Tell us the secret. How do you do it?
Yes, please tell us. I want to know too, Mike.
Well, not so I am a writer by trade. So my first job was I'm a ghostwriter. So I used to write books for people. And so I worked with motivational speakers, and I would say they were, people that would speak and they wanted to sell a book in the back of the room. You've probably seen speakers like this. So my job was to listen to them, try to distill down their message in the most concise and impactful way. And so I've always had this writing and learning bug. And so when I joined Profitero, there was a gentleman here by the name of Keith Anderson, who was the smartest guy I knew about e-commerce. And I remember saying to myself, I want to be as smart as Keith. Like, I want to learn as much as he knows. And the only way I know how to learn is by writing. So I learn by writing. I have to write it down and I have to crystallize it. So really what I just decided to do was use LinkedIn as a forum for almost like a forcing function to write down what I was learning as I was talking to different brands or what I was reading, and to have that be a forcing function for me to absorb that information. And then also as a way to test how right or wrong am I? And and one of the great things about LinkedIn is people aren't shy about telling you when you miss something, and you learn from that. So it's almost like a living document, a living way of learning by sharing with this awesome community. So I really write for myself. And by writing for myself, I hope I share value. And I don't stress myself out about how much I'm writing. It's really about, did I learn something today, and do I want to remember it? And that's my secret.
Mike, you had something when we were preparing and talking about what to talk about during this podcast. You said something about the willingness to be wrong when you're doing these posts. Will you just spend a moment on that?
So the willingness to be wrong it's almost like using the wisdom of the crowd, because if you look at my background, I never had an e-com position, right? I've never sat, and Lauren has sat in that position. I've never sat across from a Walmart buyer. I've never managed a retail media campaign, but I can intuit what that's like by talking to people, and I can try to put the pieces together. And then what I find is when I put the pieces together, I know that I'm probably getting some things wrong. Maybe I overestimated something, or I didn't state it the right way. And I'm willing to provoke the discussion, even if it means that someone might say, Mike, I disagree with you, and then learn from that and replay that back in the next time I talk about it.
Lauren, I'd love to come back to you and talk about your time at Johnson & Johnson. You managed this digital shelf, very broad, so many brands. Tell us some of your learnings from that time and that experience.
Sure. Well, first I have to say, Mike, it's super valuable. Keep doing it. And I learned something new about you today. So thank you for that. So when I was leading the digital shelf, like I said, it was before COVID, right? So it was a lot of knocking on doors and explaining that e-commerce was important and really galvanizing the organization. And one of the biggest things I learned is it's an art and a science, which is a lot of what we talk about in our recent report about content effectiveness. It was really about, how do you understand what's happening in the brand teams, the people who are actually doing the work for the brand, and then how do you translate what's happening externally with e-commerce and how Amazon changes their requirements, or Walmart or Target, and what is needed from them. And the biggest learning was the education gap. And you need to educate not only internally around how the systems work, where the data is, how you work together as a team, but also that external landscape. I remember someone came to me once, they were like, this title is not the title I gave you on Amazon. And I was like, okay, some context is Amazon can change the title without us knowing. And then it diffused the situation. It was an education element that helped them understand, and then we could have a better process moving forward. So it was simple things like that that really helped accelerate the success of the digital shelf internally in the organization and enable me to have a cross-functional working team, because then every function knew why the digital shelf was important, where they should be operating, how they should be operating. They used to call me the bat phone. So whenever anything went wrong for the digital shelf, they were like, call Lauren, she's the bat phone. But it was super helpful because they had one place to go. If they had questions, they could talk to me and I could be that quarterback throughout the organization. So for anyone going through this process right now, if you don't have a quarterback, it is super helpful and needed when you're working cross-functionally with that many brands.
You're such a natural at doing that. From all my time and experience listening to you and talking with you. Was that always the case? Did you learn it along the way? Was there a moment that crystallized for it? How did that come about?
Well, naturally, as a human being, I love networking. I love people. I love building relationships. So for me, getting that cross-functional alignment and working with different teams just came very natural to me, because I want to hear what's happening with you. How can I help you? Where can we learn together? And so I think it was just a perfect role for me. And I have to say, it really humbles you when you're in a quarterback role like that, because you might not be the person doing the work, but you're doing something that's affecting someone in the organization. So you really learn how to listen for the problem and build a process of anything that kind of helps the broader organization be successful together.
Now you're director of the Digital Shelf Institute, the DSI. Will you tell us a little bit about the Institute and what your role there involves?
Sure. So the Digital Shelf Institute is really a group of digital leaders across pretty much every industry. So I'm really excited. We just hit 8,000 members.
Congratulations.
So that is
amazing.
Awesome. Thank you. It is brands, retailers, partners. Mike's a member of the DSI. And the whole purpose is to help the broader industry and help the digital leaders who are in the seat daily doing the work do their jobs better. How can we produce content, build frameworks, create best practices that help them in their day-to-day job? I know when I was in my previous role, one of my biggest challenges was I didn't know anyone in any other organization doing my job. So the DSI really serves to connect people at different organizations so you can ask questions and say, hey, how are you doing this? Or are you thinking about this? Or how are you thinking about this? So that networking aspect is also in this role, which is why I love it so much. And I really love helping people connect. And the real purpose is just up-leveling the broader conversation and working with partners like Mike to create awesome research that helps the industry.
Mike, I got to ask another question. Chief Marketing Officer at Profitero, which was acquired by Publicis Group a couple years ago for around $200 million. Tell us about the company going through this process and your role there now.
Yeah. So Profitero, we're a commerce acceleration company, and that's a fancy way of saying we provide competitive insights and automation to help brands optimize their digital shelf and sell more products. So the way we define the digital shelf is, just like Digital Shelf Institute, it's what a consumer sees when they shop online, between the content, the search, the reviews, anything in that path to purchase. We're able to track that with our data, provide competitive insights and actions, and recommend that. So, we're part of Publicis, which has been great because what I see happening in the market, Publicis is one of the world leading retail media buyers, if not the leading one, is seeing this convergence between the digital shelf and retail media, and being at the center of that convergence is really exciting. Is definitely shaping the way that we're thinking about our product and powering some of our next innovation that we're going to be bringing to market.
Day in the life, what does it look like as CMO?
Well, a lot, it really comes down to, there's two ways to think about it. One I would say is this is an incredibly fast moving market. When I started Profitero about 6.5 years ago, I think you could count maybe on two fingers how many digital companies are out there doing digital shelf, maybe three. There's probably 25, 30, 40 of them now. And there's a lot more fragmentation in terms of how people think about their tech stack. So I wake up most of the time thinking about how do I educate the market, not just about what Profitero does, but how to think about the tech stack and how it fits together. because I think buyers right now are overwhelmed by all the choices, and there is no magic bullet technology that does everything. So you really have to help, not just sell your own benefits, but think about how do you integrate with the other tools. And a lot of my focus is trying to make those integrations happen through partnerships and finding the right partners. So you can feel like you have a connected tech stack, even if you're using multiple providers.
Now, you've seen this space really evolve. You've been there 6 years now. Digital Shelf, as you said, started off early. The analytics space has evolved. I had a previous company, as you know, Content Analytics, acquired by Syndigo, that did content health scoring. And I'd love to get your perspective on what's similar, but also what's changed now post-COVID. And we're seeing Omni, a lot of talk about in-store. How's all that coming together?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, fundamentally, Digital Shelf, the data that matters hasn't really changed. It's a lot of the same. You're collecting content pricing reviews. You may do it more frequently now. You may do it in more granularity. Like, for example, store level data now is so critical with omni-channel. So we are now tracking availability and pricing at a all store scale for Walmart, right? You didn't have that back in the day, but now because of omni-channel, the data is being pushed into different use cases that are changing the technology. So in that case, I just gave you all stores, now all of a sudden, back when I first started Profitero, you had this Digital Shelf team that was so early. They were sort of in this, kind of isolated pocket, really focused on content. Well, now Digital Shelf data is becoming critical to the sales teams, the field sales teams, to the marketing teams, and it's pulling the data into these different use cases. So now sales teams need granularity to go to a store and talk about in stocks and out of stocks, or talk about pricing. So that is changing how that data needs to go. And the other fact is, like, use cases, a great example is, I mentioned this convergence of media in Digital Shelf. Well, now Digital Shelf data isn't just being used in reporting or scorecarding function. It's actually being plugged into retail media bidding optimization. So, for example, we have an integration with Sky and PackView where we're plugging in out-of-stock data and pricing data into their bidding algorithms so that you can actually conquest competitors when they're out of stock. Like, this stuff didn't exist 6.5 years ago. So I see the path of the Digital Shelf is moving it sort of out of that sort of small team into the, what you were talking about, Lauren, that cross-functional team. Everything you dreamed about is happening, and it's up to technology to build those connection points and make it seamless and make it fast.
What a great bridge. So more use of the data, more breadth within the organization. And I think that's a great segue, Lauren, to talk about this new research report. Not the first report, I understand, that you've collaborated on together. Talk to us about it.
Yeah, Mike and I have done a lot of great work together. It's great to collaborate with him. We first started with a framework for digital shelf success. So that was the first report that came out last year. And that was really about what are the metrics you should be using to measure the digital shelf? Because to Mike's point, there are so many different ones. And if you're thinking about omnichannel, you have to include in-store. And we really wanted to dive into content specifically because that, as everybody knows, the PDP is the most important thing when you're thinking about the digital shelf. So we wanted to understand how does a brand think about effective content and what does that look like? What does that mean? And I think Mike and I both learned a lot on this journey. We interviewed over 12 different digital leaders, and it was really interesting because we thought that we would come out with maybe a similar definition to content effectiveness, but every single person defined it differently. And what we learned is that everyone's still trying to figure it out a bit because content effectiveness is not, like most of e-commerce, a 1 + 1 = 2 kind of equation. And it really is more than just the content itself. So content effectiveness sounds like, the images, the titles, everything that you find on the PDP. But what we discovered is that it's actually the people on your team, the process about creating that content, the data and systems that that content lives in, how you collaborate with your retailers to make sure that you're building out the right content, you have the right strategy. and also thinking about the shopper and what does the shopper want to see? How do they consume the content? And so we went out on this journey and we came out with a framework of all these different elements that go into content effectiveness, and how, as an organization, you can't just think in a silo, and you can't just think about, okay, here's the content we create, here's how it gets to the retailers. And it's much more broad than that.
Mike, thinking about content and how it's evolved, a broader definition perhaps, thoughts on different elements of content, different ways that brands are viewing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most interesting change, and Lauren was alluding to this, is it's getting kind of more to understanding how the content is actually resonating with shoppers and what kind of a reaction it's creating. So I think the biggest thing I learned from this entire thing was that brands, as they go through maturity, it's sort of an organizational maturity where early mature brands think of commerce content as an afterthought, right? All their brand creative process is happening in the typical way. They're creating all the typical assets you would have at the launch of a product. So think of a launch of a product and all the assets in store that have to be created. And then all of a sudden, as an afterthought, you think about the PDP. And then what happens is the commerce teams accountable for sales are dealing with suboptimal content. They're reworking it. It's just, kind of adds a lot of thought. But what we found was, as companies move in maturity, they actually make commerce content central to the brand process upfront. Just like it becomes automatic. And in fact, one brand in particular we talked to actually made commerce, makes it a pre-thought. Pre-thought, what does that mean? Well, they actually, when they're launching a new product, the very first thing they iterate on is the PDP copy. So the creative brief for the entire brand launch becomes the PDP copy. And they use that almost like you would a concept to, okay, what are we going to talk about? What are the benefits? What are the images? And once they nail that, and they actually test that with consumers, and once they nail that, then that becomes the brief for the rest of the creative for all of the brand launch to come out, which I think is a very revolutionary way to think about it. Because as a consumer, I mean, you think about what a PDP does. Like, that's your template, that's your canvas. If you get that right, you get a lot of things right. So to me, that was most surprising, is that you can see just in the maturity curve, like how content, it's either an afterthought or it's a pre-thought. And I think that was the biggest surprise for me in terms of how companies are really evolving in that area.
I love it. So this idea of the pre-thought and the PDP as your canvas, what a great way to think about it. I love that. Lauren, where are we in the maturity curve, in the content maturity curve? You've spoken with so many organizations, whether through this research that you did here or through your work at the Digital Shelf. Tell us a little about what you're seeing in these different orgs.
As I feel like an answer always is in e-commerce, it depends. You see people all over the map when it comes to maturity.
No one answer.
Right? There's no one silver bullet. There's no one good answer for this. But what I would say is, in the research, to Mike's point, we kind of outlined there was like a pre-work, then it was a crawl, walk, run, sprint. I would say we see most people in the like walk, run stage. People know that organizations understand that content is important, right? They know that they need to have it on the PDP. It needs to be compelling. I think the struggle is, to Mike's point, finding the data, getting the right systems in place, having the right people in process. And that's what takes so much time, especially if you're taking into account omnichannel, right? Because you need to think about how this content is affecting retail media. How is it affecting in-store sales? How are you plugging it into social media and all of the other elements that you have content, right? We're defining content in this report as product detail page content, but you can use that word to describe other types of content as well. So to answer your question, Dave, I think most people are in the walk run stage. The more mature brands are starting to think about that sprint phase, which is where you can incorporate things like AI and more test and learns and more of the advanced technology that actually gets to content effectiveness to say, is this image what my shopper wants to see? And are they then converting because of it?
Well, we've got the magic word AI. We've got to Got to talk about it. Obviously, a huge part of our thinking and work here at It's Rapid, where we have the privilege of working with some amazing brands like Pepsi and Newell and many, many others on their content creation. Tell us about AI. How much of it is being used? Is it experimental? Is it being operationalized? What are we seeing there?
Yeah, I'll jump in on it because I'm seeing it. I'm seeing it because we at Profitero, we're doing a lot with AI. Not surprising, many companies are, but I've had a great chance to sort of learn through that process how people are thinking about it. So the way that we're approaching it at Profitero is we think that the value is on two fronts. One is insights retrieval. So I have all this digital shelf data. I have all this market share data. I want the sales teams and the market teams to use this, but I can't send them into a dashboard. Like, we have to democratize this. So we're thinking about AI as a way to make it simple for your average person moving quickly in the world who's not an analyst to get in and out of insights. Quickly ask, like, what's my competitive share with search today? Where am I out of stock? Retrieve it and take action, or bring it into a JBP. So there's that insights retrieval. On the content side, where we're thinking about it isn't just about the generative input, but the quality of the insights feeding that, output, right? So what I mean by that is, we talk a lot in the report about what we call content sufficiency. And really what that means is that there is by retailer a science of things that influence the algorithm, whether that's keywords, and most typically it is keywords. It could be number of reviews. It could be the title count, but there are certain golden principles or truths that you can discern about a retailer. And so when we say content sufficiency, we see a lot of brands sort of like saying, okay, I'm not just going to measure my content against whatever, standards we have in a brand or what a retailer is telling me. I actually want to look at what will advance it up in search or boost conversion. And they're on a quest to find what those principles are. But once they have it, it's very manual to then apply that in practice every day. So one of the ways to think about AI is, well, if we know that has to be true, can you feed that into a generative AI model that just puts all those things together? And that's exactly how we're thinking about a Profitero. It's like, okay, hey, I have a PDP today, and Profitero is telling me which keywords are moving up and are relevant. Profitero knows the characteristics and the qualities that drive the algorithm. And then you sort of apply that and you get that output that's optimized much quicker. Now, what we're learning about how companies are thinking about it is a lot of companies they're on the hunt. They're hearing from lots of vendors about different AI tools. So first and foremost, they have to have a really good brief and RFI. Like, I'm encouraging companies to write RFIs around this. But what we're finding is approvals matter a lot. You can't just have AI without it sticking into a process. So it's really important that the AI works with your legal requirements, your brand guidelines, the workflows to get it out through a Salsify. Like, you have to build those systems. So I think that that's a little bit of the brand working very closely with their tech provider to make sure that AI can stick in their process, or otherwise it's not going to work. And I think that's a journey that a lot of brands are still on right now.
I feel like we should talk after. We may have something on workflows. Let me make a note. Lauren, you were saying.
I was just going to say, that's exactly what I'm hearing from brands as well. I think everybody knows that they should be using AI. They need to be using AI to get to scale. But for anyone has AI in their technology or is an AI company, do not discount, to Mike's point, the legal regulatory requirements that are needed to be discussed and the process that needs to be built, because in a larger organization that takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of education, like I was saying before. So helping to educate the right teams on how you're going to be using the AI, how it is impacting you, how it can help, where it's going to be plugged in. That's really where I see brands focusing a lot of their time right now.
100%. And this ability to plug it into enterprise scale, the PIM systems, the DAMs, the workflows, the approvals, delivery, all of that, couldn't agree more. Just so important. I want to touch on one more topic, which is retail media. We talked about it a little bit, but there is this growing connection between the top of the funnel, the bottom of the funnel. It's always been there, but we're seeing it much more tightly coupled now. Lauren, will you take a minute and just tell us what's going on there? What are we seeing and how do those two play together?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that question, specifically because I feel like sometimes when people say retail media and you're maybe a digital shelf manager or you're an e-commerce manager, you say, oh, I don't own that. Well, you should definitely talk to the person who does own it because they are connected. And think about it this way. If you are paying $1 on a retail media ad and that retail media ad is directing to a PDP that has incorrect content, inaccurate product descriptions, the wrong label information, that's a lost dollar, right? So you're not connecting those teams internally, then you're not spending your media dollars effectively. So how can you connect your retail media teams, your paid search teams, your e-commerce, your digital shelf teams to make sure whenever you're running an ad campaign, you're actually driving to the correct content that is going to get to the conversion? We actually just did a study with Ross Derringer from Stratably, and we found that 50% of brands have reduced ad spend on a product due to poor PDP content. And 67% of brands say that content quality is a meaningful part of the investment equation. So brands actually aren't investing in retail media networks with specific retailers because their content is not built out or they don't have an avenue to be able to build out that content because it is so intertwined. And I think that's an element of the omnichannel approach that is starting to come together because brands don't have the luxury of wasting ad spend. They never really did, but they definitely don't now as we focus on profitability. So really connecting the dots between retail media and the digital shelf is super important.
Can I get an amen on that? That is powerful.
We've got the numbers now to also back up the content investment to go with it.
Yeah, we do. That report is coming out in the next month. So it'll be exciting to have that in the industry.
Awesome. Well, we've covered so many great topics today. Got to ask predictions for digital shelf retail media the next 12 months. Lauren, I'll ask you first.
But Dave, what happens if we get them right versus get them wrong? Is it like
we'll be back in 12 months to check?
Well, so I think a couple of things. I definitely see the consolidation of retail media networks. There's over 600 right now, and that number I think is probably growing. I really think that there's going to be a massive consolidation, mostly because brand budgets are not increasing and they're really prioritizing the top 3 or 4 that are going to drive the most ROI for them. We talked about AI already. So I think applicable AI solutions, so ones that are actually scalable, are actually affecting things like efficiency or resourcing inside the organization. And the number one thing for me that I'm the most passionate about, because like you said, Dave, this is what I did for the longest time, really making sure that you're operating as an omnichannel organization, breaking down the silos, working cross-functionally, stop talking about, okay, the in-store team did this and the online team did this. No, it's commerce. We're all working together. All of our campaigns are collaborative across every channel. A shopper is not saying, I bought this product on the shelf. I bought this product on Amazon. They don't care. So we shouldn't care internally. And we should really think about how to operate by breaking down those walls.
Mike, predictions?
Well, first of all, ditto to everything I said, but I feel like my prediction probably is more of a hope and a dream. Maybe 24 months out, but I think it's really about data integration. Accelerating. You mentioned, Lauren, about omnichannel. Part of the reason why it's so siloed is because it's not easy to see all the data points together. And I think brands have a hunger to start to put the digital shelf media data along with their brick and mortar data so they can start to do proper attribution or even simply like a due to, like when I was at Nielsen, we had due tos and you could see how things were contributing. It was very clear. It's hard to do that. And I do think we're moving in a model where either teams are doing that internally or they're talking to folks like Circana and they're trying to build something that pulls the data together so they can see how all the levers add up. And I think I think some brands are sprinting that way. but it's sort of my hope and dream, because I think once you see that, you will see how impactful the digital shelf is, not just to your online share, but your in-store share. And it will unlock, I think, a lot of support and budget for our friends in e-commerce who really need to get that support. So yeah, that's what I'm predicting.
We'll have you guys back on 12 months, check on those predictions. Before I let you run, though, I got to ask a couple of fun questions as we wrap up. Which two people have inspired you the most in your professional life?
Well, I mean, I was thinking about this prior to the podcast, and you're right. It's really hard to pick two people, but I would say I had a leader, her name was Kate, when I first started in my career. And I was actually a big career switcher. So I worked in higher education before I got to corporate America. And to this day, the things that she taught me about how to be a professional, how to present yourself, how to speak in a room full of executives, I mean, I still use them today, and I would not be the person I am without her. And then I had another manager when I was at J&J. Her name was Avni, and she totally changed the way that I approached working to be more of a servant leader and think about how to manage people in an effective and helpful way for them and for me, and just really helped me change my outlook on what work could be and the amount of passion you can bring to work and how you can really affect other people's lives. And so those are the two people I would pick, but there's countless other ones that have helped.
I haven't really thought about this question a lot, but a gentleman I worked with, his name's Kevin Daly. He was one of my bosses when I worked at Afterthought. I was head of marketing, and he inherited me, and probably learned more about marketing from him in terms of telling like a simple story that I've learned from anyone. Really kind of set the tone, I think, for the way I think about content. And then the second is, I mentioned him earlier, but a gentleman by the name of Keith Anderson, who really, I think, fueled me with the passion to learn about the industry and frameworks, very much like how to tell a story with frameworks. And I often find myself referring back to the things that he taught me. So those would be two people.
Outside of work, when you guys do get some time, if you get some time, favorite hobbies outside of work and family?
Other than writing LinkedIn posts. No, I'm just kidding. I do pottery. So I love crafting and building stuff with my hands. And I got into pottery a couple of years ago. So I absolutely love it. I have not made a perfect pot yet. They're a little lopsided, but I really enjoy it.
I like hiking. I love being outdoors. I'm indoors all the time. Any chance I can get to get outside, I'm going to do it.
Awesome. Lauren, if people want to get in touch with you on the web, what's the best way for them to find you?
Probably LinkedIn. Feel free to send me a message, connect with me. Also, digitalshelfinstitute.org. If you fill out the contact form, that also goes to me as well. So happy to chat with anyone.
And Mike?
LinkedIn.
Perfect. We'll include a link to the report in the show notes. And gosh, thank you both so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks for having us.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. Beyond the Shelf is brought to you by It's Rapid. It's Rapid is the platform Pepsi, Sierra Nevada, Revlon, and hundreds of other leading brands and retailers use to build personalized content at scale. Whether that's images, videos, or product descriptions for their product detail pages, shoppable videos or banners for their digital ad campaigns, or sell sheets for sales enablement, brands that use It's Rapid are able to produce high-quality, on-brand content on average more than 80% faster than category competitors. To find out more, please visit itsrapid.ai. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Beyond the Shelf.